It's rather funny that we spend so much of our lives thinking everyone else holds the key to our suffering, as if they were mischievous locksmiths turning the tumblers of our peace. You come here with this quiet question: how do I keep from being hurt again? Carrying it like a stone in your pocket, worn smooth by touching it too often. And what a deeply human thing that is. We all do it. We imagine there is something we can perform, some posture we can adopt, some shield we can forge to keep the world from ever bruising us again. But sit here for a moment, just long enough to notice that the fear of being hurt is often far more painful than the hurt itself. It's a kind of tension under the skin, an armor that squeezes the one it tries to defend. And this tension, this bracing, is really a misunderstanding, not a failure, not a flaw, just a little knot in awareness that hasn't yet been loosened. Because the curious truth is that people don't really injure us the way we imagine. They poke at the image we hold of ourselves, but the image is not you. They disturb the story you're telling about who you must be to be safe, but the story is not you. When someone says something sharp or thoughtless, they hit the picture you've painted and then forgotten was a picture. You feel the paint crack and think it's your skin. So the whole business of do this and no one will ever hurt you again seems dramatic, but it's actually profoundly simple. It's not an action in the usual sense, not a trick or technique. It's a shift, a slipping out of the costume you didn't notice you were wearing. You see, hurt arises when you believe you are the costume. Just breathe for a moment. Feel the body sitting, the sensation of the air passing the lips, the sound of it, that soft whisper, nothing complicated. Notice how the breath appears on its own, leaves on its own. You don't have to manage it. You don't have to defend it. It doesn't ask permission to be what it is. And in that very simplicity is the thing I'm pointing to. When you stop trying to control the impression you make, the roles you maintain, the fragile portrait of me you keep polishing, suddenly the place where hurt normally lands is no longer solid. It's like someone throwing a spear at a waterfall. They expect a target, but there is only movement, clarity, nothing to strike. People can wound the mask, but not the one who sees the mask. And that's the whole marvel of it. The moment you begin to watch your own reactions instead of automatically becoming them, you discover a strange spaciousness. Someone criticizes you, and you see a cloudy swirl of emotion rise up, a tightening, a heat, but you also see that you are the space in which it rises, not the cloud itself. The cloud passes. The space remains unharmed. No one has ever touched it. This is not indifference. It's not coldness. In fact, it allows for a far greater warmth, because you're no longer hiding behind emotional armor. You're simply transparent. You realize that hurt is not delivered by others. It is created by clinging to the identity that their words appear to threaten. When that identity loosens, the whole mechanism collapses. Not with a crash, but with a sigh. It's really like watching waves roll onto a shore. Each wave has its shape, some gentle, some violent. Yet the shore is not bothered. It receives them all, and in receiving, it transforms them. Your awareness is very much like that shoreline. The waves of experience rise and fall, but the shore does not argue with them. It doesn't brace. It doesn't say, not this one is too much. It simply allows. And in that allowing, there is a kind of unshakable freedom. So when I say, do this and no one will ever hurt you again, what I mean is, see the one who cannot be hurt, the one who is aware of experience but not defined by it. The one who watches the play of emotion and thought without imagining it is the character on stage. The moment you shift from identification to observation, the arrow loses its target. And it's strange, isn't it? Once you stop defending yourself, people lose interest in attacking. They sense something open in you, something soft yet unyielding, not unyielding from rigidity, but from spaciousness. You are like a tree that bends with the wind and therefore cannot be broken. You no longer require others to behave a certain way in order for you to be whole. And the less you require, the more peaceful the human dance becomes. All of this sounds like a gentle idea, but it is actually as natural as the tide. You've had glimpses of it many times, those moments when you laughed at yourself, or felt so present that no comment could shake you, or lost yourself in a sunset and forgot, for a brief instant, to be a person with problems. In those moments, you weren't defending an identity. You were simply aware, open, alive. Imagine living from there, not as a discipline, but as a relaxation, a softening into what you already are. Then hurt becomes like wind through tall grass. It moves, it whispers, but it doesn't tear anything out by the roots. Now, of course, this doesn't mean life becomes free of challenges, but challenges are not harm, pain is not damage, a sharp word is not an injury. These things only pierce when we hold ourselves rigidly, as if we were made of glass. But you are not glass. You are not the brittle image you defend. You are the open sky in which these temporary storms unfold. And if you sit quietly long enough, you begin to sense this sky in the background of every experience. Even now, listening, pondering, perhaps resisting a little, there is a spaciousness behind it all. A listening that is untouched by what it hears. A seeing that is unmarked by what it sees. Rest there, even for a breath. Just long enough to notice that you don't have to be anything in particular. You can let go of the exhausting project of self-protection because the one you were trying to protect was never in danger. It's like waking up from a dream where you were being chased. The heart races, the breathing quickens, but then you open your eyes and laugh. Not because the threat was defeated, but because it was never real. And the quiet miracle is that once you see this, no one can truly hurt you again, not because people change, but because the place where hurt is manufactured becomes transparent. There is nothing to stab. There is only awareness, fluid, spacious, free. And that is the beginning of a very different way of moving through the world. A way in which compassion arises not as a moral duty, but as a natural overflow of not needing protection. A way in which relationships stop being battles and become dances. A way in which you can finally rest, not because life has become easier, but because you have stopped holding yourself so tightly. And from here, the path continues, like a river slipping quietly into deeper water. And the river widens. See, not by effort, but by surrendering to its own flow. When you allow yourself to move like that, unresisting, undefended, something very subtle begins to shift. You no longer meet the world with the tight fist of expectation, but with an open palm. And an open palm cannot be wounded in the way a clenched one can. It receives, it touches, it lets go. The curious thing is that once you stop treating life as a threat, you begin to notice a kind of quiet kindness woven through it all, even in the moments that once felt harsh. What you used to call hurt reveals itself as a misunderstanding, a mistaken interpretation of a movement that was never aimed at the core of you at all. People act from their own storms, their own confusions, their own histories, their words, their gestures. These are ripples on the surface of the water, shaped by winds that have nothing to do with your depth. To realize this is to be free, not from people, but from the illusion that their storms define you. And as this settles in, gently, like dust returning to the earth, you start to feel something astonishingly soft in yourself. Not fragile, soft like moss, soft like dusk. You begin to sense that vulnerability is not a weakness, but a doorway. Hurt only feels threatening when you believe there is something that must not be touched. But when you discover that what you truly are cannot be harmed, vulnerability becomes simply openness, a willingness to let experience pass through without turning it into a wound. Feel that for a moment. The world passing through you like wind through branches, and the branch bending, whispering, unbroken. There's an odd beauty in realizing you don't need protection. Not because the world is perfect, but because the essence of you is untouchable. People will still say what they say, react as they react, but their movements meet you the way waves meet the sky. They touch, they reflect, they dissolve, and you remain clear. Once this clarity becomes familiar, you might notice something else. You stop rehearsing imaginary conversations in your head. You stop preparing defenses for scenarios that haven't happened. You stop tightening against phantom threats. And in the space that appears when these inner rehearsals fade, you discover a quiet joy, a kind of lightness that comes from no longer carrying the armor that was never needed. It's almost humorous in a way. We walk around like turtles, convinced that without our shell we'd be destroyed, only to discover that the shell was the only thing weighing us down. When it drops, even for a moment, you feel the breeze on skin you didn't know was there, and life begins to glow from within, not because anything external has changed, but because you finally meet the world without the haze of self-defense. And this glow, this inner spaciousness, has a strange effect on others. They sense it, not as something mystical, but as a kind of ease. They feel they don't have to tiptoe around you. They don't have to perform. They don't have to play the exhausting game of mutual protection. And suddenly, conversations become more honest. Moments become more intimate. Even silence becomes comfortable. This is what happens when you stop identifying with the one who can be wounded. You become transparent, and in that transparency, relationships lose their sharp edges. They become, instead, like two rivers, meeting, merging, separating, flowing on, each carrying the essence of the other without strain. And if someone does lash out, well, you see the lashing for what it is, a wave kicked up by a storm in them. You feel the movement, but you no longer interpret it as a verdict on your worth. You watch it rise, crest, and fall. And because you don't hold on to it, it doesn't hold on to you. This is the quiet art of being unharmed. It doesn't require discipline. It doesn't require perfection. It simply requires noticing, again and again, that the one who feels hurt is a momentary shape, a swirl of thought and tension, while the one who sees this swirl is clear, open, untouched, just like watching a gust of wind bend a candle flame. The flame flickers, yes, but the light remains. And the space around the flame, the silent, empty space, is never disturbed. Most people spend their lives trying to keep the flame perfectly still. They build walls around it, hide it under glass, guard it with suspicion. But all that effort blinds them to the simple truth. The flame was never the vulnerable part. The flame dances. It's meant to. The space around it, the awareness watching, that is what remains untouched, no matter how the flame sways. And so the whole question of being hurt shifts entirely. It's not about strengthening yourself or avoiding certain people or mastering the art of clever replies. It's about remembering, moment by moment, that you are the space, not the flicker. Once you see this clearly, hurt becomes like a footprint in sand, visible for a moment, changing shape, disappearing with the next breeze. And the sand remains, patient and unconcerned. Of course, the mind will try to reclaim its throne. It will say, yes, but what about this situation? What about that person? It will search for exceptions, for reasons to tighten again. Let it. The mind is like a dog checking every corner after hearing a noise. It means well. It's only trying to protect you from shadows it doesn't understand. Smile at it. Let it look. But notice that the one watching the mind's fussing is already free. And in that noticing, in that simple, effortless awareness, no one can hurt you again, because there is no one separate to be harmed. There is only the play of experience, rising and falling in a vast, quiet presence that cannot be touched. The world softens when you soften, not as a reward, but as a reflection. And perhaps, as you sit here listening, something in you loosens, just a little. A small exhale you didn't know you were holding. And with that exhale comes the faint taste of this freedom. Not dramatic.
When a man starts to wake up, he naturally pulls away from the crowd. Not because he hates people, but because the usual way of connecting stops making sense. Most conversations revolve around status, gossip, or complaints. And once he begins to see through that, it gets harder to engage. He's not bitter. He's not isolating himself out of pride. He's just stopped chasing what others are still chasing. He starts to notice the performance in everyday interaction, the need to be liked, to belong, to say the right thing. And without making a big deal about it, he quietly steps back. People might still wave. They might still offer small talk. But the connection is no longer there, because it was never real to begin with. He didn't cut ties, he didn't burn bridges. He simply stopped pretending. And when he does that, distance happens on its own. This is the beginning of solitude, not loneliness, just space between who he used to be and who he's becoming. He starts to see clearly what holds people together isn't real. It's not depth, it's not truth. It's habit, comfort, and shared illusions. People bond over complaining about their jobs, over chasing status, over defending ideas they've never truly questioned. He used to do the same. He used to think that was connection. But now it feels more like noise. He notices how often people speak, just to avoid silence. How much energy goes into keeping up appearances. The constant need for validation, for agreement, for reassurance. And once he no longer needs those things himself, he sees how dependent others are on them. How relationships often survive not because of honesty, but because everyone agrees to keep the story going. He understands why people hold on to what feels familiar. He still cares. He still listens, but he no longer plays along. That shift, subtle as it is, creates distance all on its own. From the outside, he might seem the same. He still shows up. He's still polite. He hasn't disappeared completely. But something fundamental has shifted, and the people around him can feel it, even if they can't name it. They sense that he's no longer trying to impress anyone, that he's not looking for approval, that he's not playing the social game anymore. Some find it admirable, others find it unsettling, because he's no longer easy to read, because he's not performing for anyone. He doesn't flatter, doesn't compete, doesn't entertain, and that makes him hard to place. People might say he's distant, or too quiet, or that he's changed. What they really mean is, he no longer fits into the roles they've grown used to. They liked him better when he reflected their values. Now, he reflects something else, something still, grounded, and not dependent on being liked. People see him, but they don't really know him, because knowing him now would require them to see what he sees, and most people aren't ready for that. He once believed that staying connected meant staying involved, showing up, participating in conversations, maintaining appearances. But with time, that definition changed. As his priorities shifted inward, he stopped engaging out of obligation, not because he cared less, but because he no longer needed others to affirm his place in the world. He still values connection, but not if it depends on constant engagement, emotional performance, or subtle negotiation for approval. He doesn't withdraw out of resentment. He simply no longer finds value in maintaining relationships built on pretense or expectation. To those accustomed to transactional connection, his presence can feel distant. But in truth, he's simply not playing the same role anymore. He no longer speaks just to keep the peace. He no longer sees himself through other people's eyes. What emerges in that space is not loneliness, but clarity. A calm independence that allows him to remain rooted even when others come and go. He's become honest, and from that honesty, a deeper kind of freedom begins to take shape. From the outside, solitude is often misunderstood. To most people, being alone signals a lack of friends, of purpose, of belonging. But for a man who has begun to see clearly, solitude becomes something else entirely. He no longer fills his time with distractions, just to avoid being alone with himself. He no longer seeks out constant company, to escape discomfort. He's learned to sit in silence without needing it to end. What others describe as loneliness is often just unfamiliar stillness. They equate the absence of noise with emptiness. He's realized that most of what fills a typical day, talks, tasks, and duties, is just noise pretending to be important. In solitude, he sees himself without distortion. There's no one to impress, no image to maintain, and that clarity, while uncomfortable at first, becomes a source of strength. He doesn't avoid people, but he also no longer depends on them to feel complete. This shift usually confuses others. They assume he must be withdrawn, disconnected, or even arrogant. But in truth, he's simply content with his own presence. He has faced the silence most people run from and discovered it wasn't silence at all. It was peace. As he grows more inwardly stable, he becomes less predictable to others. Not by intent, but by the simple fact that he no longer participates in the subtle exchanges that define most social interaction. He does not mirror emotions to gain approval. He does not offer reassurance when it would mean denying what he sees. To those still dependent on external validation, this creates discomfort. They may interpret his neutrality as arrogance, his silence as judgment, his detachment as disinterest. In reality, he is none of those things. He's simply no longer invested in managing perception. Much of what people call connection is actually a performance, a mutual agreement to keep certain illusions intact. Once he steps outside that arrangement, he disrupts it just by being present. He doesn't argue or provoke or attempt to convert anyone to his view. But the absence of familiar signals, approval, flattery, emotional reinforcement, makes others uneasy. Many of his previous friendships begin to fade, not because of conflict, but because the foundation they stood on no longer holds. He begins to notice how often relationships are maintained through shared complaints, routine habits, or the mutual reinforcement of personal narratives. Once he no longer participates in those patterns, the connection weakens on its own. He no longer feels compelled to offer agreement for the sake of belonging. He no longer entertains conversations that avoid substance, and he has no interest in maintaining ties that require him to shrink himself. This shift is not a rejection of others. It's the result of a change in what he's willing to invest his energy in. True friendship becomes something quieter, simpler, and far more rare. It is no longer based on shared illusions, but on mutual recognition. Two people who don't need each other, yet choose to walk alongside one another without expectation. These kinds of connections cannot be manufactured. They emerge naturally, if at all, and only when both individuals have stopped seeking to be completed by the other. Most social interaction relies on unspoken rules. You validate my perspective, I'll validate yours. We won't go too deep. We won't challenge each other's assumptions. We'll pretend we agree, even if we don't. He used to play by those rules because everyone did. But once he starts operating outside of them, the dynamic begins to break down. He no longer gives comfort just to ease tension. He doesn't pretend to agree when he doesn't. He's done with the little acts that keep everyone else feeling safe, but keep him feeling false. This isn't defiance, it's clarity. And that clarity is disruptive because it exposes how much of everyday life is based on mutual avoidance of truth. People notice, even if they don't understand what's changed, they feel the shift. They sense that something familiar has gone missing. The constant exchange of comfort, validation, and distraction. And without him feeding the system weakens. Talks start to feel awkward. People stop reaching out as much. What used to feel warm and familiar now feels tense and uneasy. Not because he did something wrong, but because he stopped playing along. He hasn't rejected anyone. He simply stopped reinforcing a structure he no longer believes in. As his understanding deepens, something unexpected happens. He begins to need less, not just materially, but emotionally, socially, even intellectually. He no longer seeks recognition. He no longer relies on others to confirm what he already knows internally. And as that need dissolves, so do many of the relationships that once required it. This is the paradox. The clearer he becomes, the quieter his life becomes. Not because he's closed off, but because so much of what once filled his time was rooted in a search for external affirmation. Without that search, most social activity feels optional, if not unnecessary. He stops trying to be understood. He stops needing to explain. He no longer measures his presence by how much space he takes up in other people's lives. From the outside, this might look like withdrawal, but inside it's the opposite, a settling into something solid and real. He still values connection, but only when it emerges naturally, without demand or performance. He hasn't become cold. He is simply no longer dependent. And in that detachment, there's a kind of depth that can't be found through attachment. Once he wakes up, he can't unsee what he sees. He looks inward, and the noise quiets. He looks outward, and the world is still asleep. He sees the false certainty in people's eyes, the roles they perform, the beliefs they never question, the constant movement that masks an inner stillness they haven't touched. He no longer envies what others call connection, because he understands the cost it often demands: agreement, performance, conformity, and he won't trade truth for the comfort of fitting in. Still, there's a part of him that remembers, a part that quietly hopes, not for crowds, not for company, but for someone awake, someone who has seen what he's seen, felt what he's felt, someone who doesn't need him to be smaller, quieter, or more agreeable in order to feel safe. That kind of meeting is rare. It can't be forced, and he would rather wait in silence than pretend in conversation. So he walks alone, not because he enjoys being apart, but because in a world still dreaming, authenticity is more valuable than acceptance. At some point, the solitude stops feeling unusual. It becomes normal, not empty, just quiet. He no longer interprets distance as a problem to solve. He sees it for what it is, the natural result of no longer pretending. While others surround themselves with noise, he has learned to live in stillness. While many chase attention, he moves without asking to be seen. People often assume he must feel lonely, as if company, any company, is always better than walking alone. But they confuse isolation with absence. He is not absent. He is simply no longer performing. He has come to prefer the space that honesty creates over the closeness that illusion demands. This is the final shift. He doesn't need the world to wake up for him to feel whole. He doesn't need agreement to feel clear. And he doesn't need validation to know who he is. He walks alone, yes, but not as an outsider. As a man at peace with the cost of truth.
You see, we spend most of our lives trying to get money, but very few ever stop to ask why they want it in the first place. We chase money as though it's oxygen, as though without it, we cannot live, breathe, or be happy. But have you noticed that the more desperate you are for it, the more it seems to run away? And when you finally stop running, when you stop chasing, it often seems to find its way to you effortlessly, like a bird that lands quietly on your shoulder when you're still. It's quite a curious thing. You want money because you want freedom, but in the chase for money, you often lose the very freedom you were seeking. You become anxious, impatient, and trapped by your own desire. You become like a man digging for water in the desert who forgets that the oasis was already inside him. Now, I want to tell you a secret that life has been whispering to you all along. The money comes faster when you stop needing it to come. When you stop begging the universe with the vibration of lack and begin to live as though you already possess abundance, everything begins to flow differently. Because reality, my dear friend, is not responding to your words. It is responding to your state of being. When you say, I want more money, what you are really declaring is, I don't have enough. And that feeling, that inner frequency, is what the world mirrors back to you. The universe is not your servant. It is your reflection. And whatever you feel most strongly becomes the signal it sends right back. I remember once saying that desire is a contract you make with yourself to be unhappy until you get what you want. You see, that is the trap when you tie your joy, your sense of self, your peace of mind to the arrival of money. You postpone happiness indefinitely. You wait for the outside world to change before you permit yourself to feel whole inside. But reality does not work that way. Reality rearranges itself around the vibration you are embodying. Now, the moment you say, I will be happy when I have money, you are broadcasting to existence that you are not yet happy, and existence simply reflects that. It will keep giving you situations that confirm your belief. This is why people stay poor, not because of a lack of effort, but because of the emotional atmosphere they live in, the inner weather they keep repeating each day. But imagine for a moment if you reversed it. What if you decided to feel abundant before the money comes? What if you walked through life with the vibration of someone who already has more than enough? What if you practiced gratitude not as a trick to get something, but as a state of genuine recognition that life itself is already full? Here's the paradox. The moment you stop using gratitude to manipulate the future, it actually begins to change. When you are no longer thanking the universe because you want it to do something for you, and instead thank it because you realize it already has, you step into the creative flow that allows more to come easily. Most people think they must do something to attract abundance. But the real secret is not in the doing, it's in the being. When your inner world is aligned with wealth, when you think, feel, and act like a person who already has it, is inevitable that your outer world will rearrange to reflect that. Because what you truly are inside cannot help but radiate outward. Think of it this way. You do not get money by running after it, just as you do not catch your own shadow by chasing it. You align with the light, and the shadow follows naturally. Money is the same. It is the shadow of your inner vibration. It follows the light of your consciousness. And the brighter that light, the faster the shadow moves to you. You see, money is not a reward from life. It is an expression of energy, a symbol of exchange, an extension of flow. When you are in a state of openness, creativity, and service, when you are genuinely giving your energy to life in a joyful way, money flows naturally as part of that current. But when you contract, when you tighten up with fear or lack, you dam the river. You block the current that was trying to bring you more. And this is the great irony of abundance. The tighter you hold on to it, the less you have. The more you let go, the more you receive. When you understand this, you begin to see why some people seem to magnetize wealth effortlessly.
It's not that they are more intelligent, or luckier, or blessed by fate. It's that they have stopped resisting life. They have stopped sending out signals of fear and scarcity. They are not trying to get, they are allowing themselves to be. Now, what does this mean in practical terms? It means that if you wish for money to come faster, you must stop worshipping it. You must stop seeing it as your savior. You must begin to see it for what it truly is, an echo of your inner abundance, a reflection of your relationship with yourself. Ask yourself, how do I feel when I think about money? If you feel tense, anxious, impatient, or guilty, those are the vibrations you are feeding into the field. That is the emotional music you are playing to the universe. And the universe always dances to your tune. If your song is one of desperation, it will send you experiences that match desperation. If your song is one of ease, gratitude, and joy, then it will send you experiences that match that too. So instead of asking, how can I get more money? Ask, how can I feel more abundant right now? Because that feeling is the real currency. Money follows the feeling, not the other way around. You don't wait for a heater to get warm before turning it on. You generate the warmth first. The same applies here. You don't wait for external wealth to create internal abundance. You create the inner abundance, and the external wealth appears as a consequence. Now, the modern mind finds this deeply uncomfortable because we've been conditioned to believe that hard work and struggle are the only valid ways to succeed. We are taught to grind, to compete, to strive. But the truth is, effort without alignment is wasted energy. You can row a boat tirelessly, but if it's facing the wrong direction, you'll never reach your destination. When you are aligned internally, when your thoughts, emotions, and actions are coherent, things begin to move swiftly, almost magically. Doors open without effort. Opportunities appear where none existed. People show up at the right moment. You call it coincidence, but it's simply coherence at work. The universe is a field of infinite intelligence, responding to frequency. Every thought, every emotion, every belief you hold emits a vibration. When your vibration says, I am abundant, the field mirrors it with situations that confirm that truth. But when your vibration says, I'm lacking, it reflects lack. You cannot deceive the universe. It doesn't listen to your words. It reads your energy. And so, money is not something you earn as much as something you allow. It comes through you, not to you. It flows through the channels of your belief, your gratitude, your openness, and your creativity. It comes faster when you stop pushing it away with resistance and begin to trust that it is part of the same flow that gives breath, sunlight, and life itself. When you truly grasp this, you'll understand why so many spiritual teachers speak about surrender not as a form of passivity, but as a deep act of trust. To surrender is not to sit and do nothing. It is to stop forcing things to happen. It is to stop resisting the natural rhythm of life. It is to know that you are already connected to everything you need, and that your only task is to align with it internally. You cannot attract abundance from a state of frustration. You cannot call in wealth from a vibration of need, because in that vibration, you are telling the universe that you are separate from abundance, and so you remain so. But when you relax, when you breathe deeply and truly feel that life itself supports you, money begins to flow toward you, not as a bribe, not as a prize, but as a natural expression of your trust. So, the doing that brings money faster is not doing in the conventional sense. It is not about hustling harder, or making more lists, or pushing yourself into exhaustion. It is the inner work, the aligning of your state with the energy of abundance. It's the silent practice of tuning your mind and emotions until they sing in harmony with prosperity. You don't need to manipulate the world. You need to harmonize with it. When you do, the world responds with synchronicity, grace, and ease. Now, let's talk about something even deeper, the energy behind the intention. Why do you want money? Truly? Most people say because I want to feel free or I want to feel safe. But freedom and safety are not things that come after money. They are the states that allow money to arrive. When you feel free now, the vibration of freedom attracts experiences that match it, including financial opportunities. When you feel safe now, the vibration of safety magnetizes circumstances that confirm your safety, including money. So you must become the thing you wish to attract long before it appears. This is the mystical law of resonance, the same law that governs sound, music, and even the orbits of planets. If you listen to an orchestra, you'll notice that every instrument plays in harmony when tuned to the same frequency. Life operates the same way. When you tune your consciousness to the frequency of wealth through gratitude, trust, and joy, everything around you begins to harmonize. People, events, and ideas tune themselves to your vibration, and suddenly, what once seemed impossible becomes effortless. But if your inner world is dissonant, if one part of you believes in abundance while another part clings to fear, you create interference. You send mixed signals to the field, and the universe does not know which one to reflect. That's why self-awareness is the foundation of manifestation. You must become aware of the stories you tell yourself about money, the fears you inherited, the limitations you absorbed, the beliefs that no longer serve you. Because your beliefs are not truths. They are choices you've repeated so often that they've hardened into reality. But the moment you see them clearly, they begin to dissolve, and in their place, new possibilities emerge. When you begin to observe your relationship with money without judgment, something remarkable happens. You start to see that the anxiety, the grasping, the need to control, none of it is truly about the money itself. It's about what you believe money will fix. Somewhere deep within, you've been taught that money is the bridge between where you are and the life you want. But the truth is much gentler, much more profound. The bridge is your consciousness itself. If your consciousness is rooted in fear, you could win the lottery tomorrow and still feel unsafe. You could have millions in your account and yet feel poor inside. You'd still check your balance, still worry about losing it, still carry that faint vibration of not enough. Because wealth is not the amount of money you have, it's the amount of peace you feel when you have it. So what truly brings the money faster? Paradoxically, it is the release of the need for it. It is the moment when you realize that money was never the goal. It was only the mirror reflecting how deeply you trust life. When you trust completely, you become like the ocean that never worries whether it will receive another wave. You simply exist in the rhythm of give and take, ebb and flow. Consider how nature operates. The tree doesn't demand sunlight. It allows the sun to reach it. The river doesn't force its current. It simply flows according to gravity. The flower doesn't chase the bee. It blooms. And the bee arrives naturally. Yet, humans, with all their cleverness, have managed to complicate the very principle of abundance. We've turned life into a contest. And in that contest, we've forgotten how to receive. To receive is not an act of laziness. It is an act of openness. And that openness is born of trust. When you trust that life supports you, you are no longer trying to force things into existence. You become receptive to the infinite possibilities already surrounding you. You stop narrowing your vision to the single path you believe will make you rich, and instead begin to see the countless other ways abundance can reach you. I once said that the meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious, yet everyone rushes around in a panic, as though it were necessary to achieve something beyond that. This panic is the same one that makes you chase money. But if you pause, just pause and truly see where you are, you may notice that life is already taking care of you in thousands of invisible ways. The breath entering your lungs, the sunlight warming your skin, the way your body repairs itself without your command. These are all signs that abundance is already happening, here and now. When you feel that deeply, gratitude arises naturally. Not as a mental exercise, but as a spontaneous recognition of how miraculous it all is. And in that recognition, your vibration shifts. The desperate current of I need softens into I am provided for. The clenched fist opens, and suddenly the river of prosperity can flow again. So, if you wish to make money come faster, stop thinking of it as something outside of yourself. Begin to treat every thought, every emotion, every action as a form of energetic currency. Ask yourself, what am I investing my energy in today? Are you spending it on worry, on comparison, on self-doubt? Or are you investing it in creativity and generosity and trust. Because whatever you give your attention to grows. Money follows energy, and energy follows attention. That is the secret that the mystics and the physicists both agree upon. You are not a victim of circumstance. You are a participant in creation. Now, let's explore a simple shift that can transform your relationship with money almost overnight. Instead of asking, how can I get more? Ask, how can I give more? Not give more out of guilt, but out of abundance. Not because you feel obligated, but because giving affirms that you have more than enough. When you give freely, whether it's your time, your kindness, your talent, or your resources, you are declaring to the universe, I am abundant. And the universe, always echoing your state, responds in kind. It cannot help but fill the space you have opened. You become a conduit rather than a container, and the flow accelerates through you. But remember, giving must come from authenticity, not performance. If you give with the hidden hope that it will make you rich, the vibration of need still dominates, and the current remains slow. But if you give because you truly feel rich already, that energy becomes magnetic. People, opportunities, and ideas are drawn to that field of genuine abundance. Have you noticed how easy it is to trust people who are at peace with themselves? You can feel it even before they speak. Their presence radiates calm, their words carry weight, and their actions flow effortlessly. That is what money responds to. It flows toward coherence, confidence, and ease. It avoids confusion, desperation, and fear. So, your task is not to convince money to come. It is to become the kind of person money enjoys being around. You do this through presence, through awareness, through the simple act of bringing yourself back again and again to the truth that everything you need is already here in potential form. When you act from that knowing, your energy field becomes clear. You stop vibrating in two directions at once. You stop saying, I believe I can be wealthy, while secretly fearing that you can't. You begin to live from the state of I already am. That's when the miracles begin, not because the universe suddenly starts paying attention to you, but because you finally start paying attention to the universe. Now, let me tell you a small story, one that carries within it the essence of this whole teaching. There was once a man who lived in a small village. He worked tirelessly every day, hoping to save enough to build a better life. He counted his coins carefully, feared spending them, and went to sleep each night worrying that they would vanish. One day, a wise traveler passed through the village and said to him, Why do you worry so much? The field you work in is full of gold. The man laughed. Nonsense, he said. I've worked that field for 20 years. There's only dirt and sweat in it. The traveler smiled. Look again, he said. Not with your eyes, but with your heart. The man was puzzled, but that night he sat quietly under the stars, and for the first time in years, he stopped worrying. He felt the cool wind, the hum of crickets, the quiet pulse of life around him. Something inside him softened. And the next morning, when he returned to the field, he noticed things he'd never seen before. The richness of the soil, the patterns of light, the gentle rhythm of the earth. He began to work differently, no longer with tension, but with joy. And within a year, his crops multiplied beyond measure. He realized then that the field had always been full of gold. It was his own vision that had been poor. You see, wealth does not come from outside. It comes through perception. When your eyes change, your world changes. And so, perhaps the greatest practice for attracting money faster is not affirmations, not strategy, not even meditation in the usual sense. It is awareness. Awareness of your own inner dialogue, awareness of the stories you tell about scarcity and struggle. When you see them clearly, you stop feeding them with belief. And in that very moment, your vibration shifts. Some people ask, but Alan, if I stop worrying, if I stop caring so much about money, won't I become lazy? Won't I stop trying? To that I say, no, you will finally begin living. For what we call laziness is often just the absence of fear. When you stop working out of fear, you begin creating out of love. You become more efficient, more inspired, and far more magnetic. Because action born of joy is infinitely more powerful than action born of worry. So here's what I suggest. Begin every morning with a moment of quiet acknowledgement. Before you look at your phone, before you check your bank account, close your eyes and say softly to yourself, I am supported by life. I am connected to abundance. I am already enough. Feel it not as a mantra to fix something, but as a truth that is already here. Let that feeling expand in your chest until it fills your body. Then go about your day as if this were true. Spend money with joy, not fear. Speak about your goals with ease, not anxiety. Notice the small gifts life brings, a kind word, a smile, a new idea, and treat them as signs that abundance is flowing. Because it is. You will find that when you stop chasing, things begin to chase you. The phone rings, opportunities appear, coincidences multiply. This is not superstition, it is physics. The vibration you emit shapes the field around you. And when that vibration says, I already have, the universe replies, indeed you do. Understand, though, that this is not a one-time trick. It is a way of being. You must keep returning to it every time your old conditioning tries to pull you back into fear. Every time you notice yourself tightening, judging, or doubting, simply pause. Take a breath. Remember the truth. Money is not your source. Life is. And life is infinite. As this awareness deepens, something even more extraordinary begins to happen. You start to see that what you really desired was never the money itself, it was expansion, expression, and experience. Money was just one of the ways life could deliver that. Once you realize that, the universe becomes infinitely creative in how it supports you. Sometimes the abundance comes as money. Sometimes it comes as opportunity, love, or insight. But it always comes. And in that realization, you are free. Because when you are no longer dependent on one form of abundance, you open yourself to all of them. You stop being a beggar at the door of life and remember that you are, in fact, life itself, endless, expressive, abundant. So the money comes faster by doing this, by being what you seek, by letting go of the constant effort to acquire and instead embody the state of already having, by relaxing into the present moment and trusting that life is intelligent enough to arrange itself on your behalf. You don't attract wealth by chasing wealth. You attract it by living richly rich in thought, in gratitude, in giving, in trust. And when you live that way, the external wealth has no choice but to match it. Remember, life does not reward desperation, it mirrors vibration. So practice joy now. Practice generosity now. Practice the feeling of abundance now. And soon, you will find that the money was never late. It was simply waiting for you to arrive at the right frequency. Because in the end, abundance is not something you pursue, it is what you are. And when you realize that fully, you'll laugh, as I often do, at the cosmic joke of it all, that you were never trying to get money. You were only trying to remember that you already had everything you needed to let it flow.
There comes a moment in every person's life when the dream begins to shimmer, when the familiar world starts to look just slightly unreal. You may be sitting in traffic, or washing the dishes, or standing in line at the market, and suddenly, without warning, something inside you stirs. The voices around you feel distant, the motions mechanical, and for a brief second, you sense that you are watching a play you no longer believe in. That is the beginning of awakening. Now, it's a very strange thing, because most people don't want to wake up. They say they do, of course. They read about enlightenment, they listen to lectures, they meditate with furrowed brows. But what they really want is to dream a more pleasant dream, not to wake up entirely. For awakening, you see, has a way of shaking the ground beneath everything you thought was solid. It turns your world upside down and whispers, none of this is quite what you believed. The moment you begin to wake up, the game changes. You start to notice how much of life is made of roles, how everyone, including yourself, has been acting a part. The businessman acts successful, the monk acts humble, the teacher acts wise, the student acts eager. And you begin to laugh, not in mockery but in wonder, realizing that you too were an actor, performing your identity as though it were real. And then comes the disorienting thought, if I am not this character, then who am I? That is the first irritation you cause to others when you begin to awaken. You start to question the script, and nothing annoys a cast more than an actor who forgets their lines. Society is built on collective agreement, you see. We all pretend that money is valuable, that titles mean something, that certain clothes indicate worth, that success equals happiness. These agreements keep the game consistent. When you stop believing them, you disturb the rhythm. You may find that people around you begin to react defensively. They sense something unsettling about you, not because you preach, but because you no longer respond the way they expect. You no longer feed the drama, no longer trade in gossip, no longer chase the same symbols. You have, in a sense, stepped off the stage and begun to watch the play. And that simple act threatens the illusion of those still performing. Now, it's not your fault. It's simply that awakening has consequences. The spiritually awake person irritates the ego in others because your very presence reveals that there is another way to be. You become a kind of mirror that refuses to flatter. People look at you and unconsciously feel the quiet question, what if I've been asleep all along? And for the ego, that is the most terrifying question of all. The ego, you see, thrives on certainty. It wants to know who it is, what it controls, what others think of it. It builds fences of identity and calls them safety. But awakening is like a breeze that slips through the cracks. It whispers, you are not this, you are not that, you are not even what you think. And when that whisper comes, the ego trembles. It tightens its grip, it resists, and it lashes out. This is why, throughout history, those who have awakened have often been ridiculed, misunderstood, or even feared. Socrates irritated Athens. Buddha confused kings. Jesus angered the priests, not because they sought to overthrow the world, but because they saw through it. They pointed out that the emperor had no clothes, and the emperor never likes that kind of news. When you begin to see through the illusion, you realize that much of what people call reality is simply convention rules agreed upon for the sake of order, not truth. That is why the awakened being appears so calm. They are not rebelling against the game. They've simply stopped mistaking it for ultimate reality. They can play it with lightness, humor, and grace, because they know it's a play. The danger, however, is to mistake awakening for superiority. Many fall into that trap. They believe, I am awake and others are not, and thus a new ego is born, the ego of the enlightened one. But awakening is not about being better. It is about seeing that there is no better and no worse, that every being, sleeping or awake, is the same life expressing itself in different forms. You see, if you understand that, compassion naturally arises. You no longer resent those who misunderstand you. You pity them gently, as you would someone lost in a dream. And you remember that you too were once asleep. There's no judgment in that, only understanding. And here is the most beautiful paradox. The more awake you become, the more ordinary you seem. You laugh more. You stop trying to fix everyone. You realize there's nothing to preach, nothing to convert, nothing to save. Because what could possibly need saving in a universe that is already perfect in its imperfection? It's like a person who's been searching everywhere for their glasses only to find them perched on their nose. They laugh, not because they've achieved something great, but because they finally see how absurd the whole search was. So, when you begin to wake up, life becomes at once lighter and deeper. You cry more easily, but you also laugh more freely. You see tragedy and comedy as two sides of the same cosmic coin. You stop clinging to permanence because you understand that change is the very nature of being. And as this realization sinks in, the irritation you cause others begins to lessen, not because they've awakened, but because you've stopped needing them to. You walk among the sleeping with kindness, knowing that each of them will stir in their own time, in their own way. You see, awakening is not something you achieve. It's what happens when you stop trying to achieve. It's the natural unfolding of awareness once the mind grows quiet enough to notice that it's always been awake. The illusion was never that you were asleep, only that you thought you were separate. And when that illusion fades, you see it everywhere. In the laughter of a child, in the rustle of leaves, in the sound of traffic, in the stillness of the night. Life itself becomes your teacher, your lover, your companion. There is no outside anymore, no other, no thing to attain. There is only this endless moment, shimmering with the quiet presence of what you truly are. You see, once a person begins to wake up, there's a very curious thing that happens. The world doesn't change, not outwardly, but your relationship to it shifts completely. What once seemed heavy begins to feel light. What once demanded control now asks only for understanding. And the extraordinary thing is that life, which used to appear as a struggle, begins to unfold as a kind of play. Now, I don't mean a frivolous play, not a game of escapism, but a play in the deepest sense, the Sanskrit word lila, meaning the divine play of existence itself. The entire universe, in all its complexity and tragedy and beauty, is this cosmic dance of energy, constantly expressing and dissolving itself. And here's the marvelous part. You are it. You are the dance, the dancer, and the witnessing of it all. The trouble begins only when you forget that, when you take the game too seriously. You begin to believe that the masks are your face, that your job is your worth, that your name defines your being. And so you build a little fortress around this idea called me, and you spend your life defending it. But the walls are made of paper, and the wind of reality is strong. When you awaken, those walls start to tremble. At first, it feels like a loss, the loss of identity, the loss of meaning, the loss of certainty. But as the dust settles, you realize that nothing real was lost at all. Only the illusions have fallen away. What remains is not a smaller self, but a boundless presence. This is why the awakened person often appears so still. They are not indifferent. They are simply no longer confined to a single perspective. They can move between joy and sorrow without resistance, because they understand that both are waves on the same ocean. When you are no longer trying to control the tide, you can float. And this floating, this effortless way of being, is what the Chinese call wu wei, non-forcing. It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means allowing everything to happen through you rather than by you. It is living as the wind blows, as the water flows, as the fire burns, naturally, spontaneously, and with complete trust in the unfolding of things. Most people live as if they are separate from life, as if the universe is something they must manipulate into shape. But you see, that's the grand illusion. You are not living in the universe. You are the universe living itself as you. Every breath you take is the cosmos inhaling and exhaling through this particular form. Every thought, every heartbeat, every tear is the dance continuing in yet another rhythm. Once you see this, you stop asking, what should I do with my life? Because the question itself dissolves. Life is already doing itself through you. The tree doesn't ask how to grow. The river doesn't ask which way to flow. They simply express the nature of what they are. You, too, are that expression. And then comes the greatest freedom of all, the freedom from needing to be free. You no longer chase enlightenment because you realize that the seeker was the sought. The destination was never somewhere else. It was the ground beneath your feet the entire time. Now, this understanding doesn't mean that pain disappears. Life still contains its sorrows, its heartbreaks, its moments of loss. But suffering, you see, is what happens when we resist pain. Pain is natural, suffering is optional. When you accept that even sorrow has its place in the dance, you begin to see beauty in everything, even in endings. When someone awakens, their laughter changes. It's not the laughter of mockery or victory, but of recognition. The laughter of someone who suddenly sees the simplicity behind the elaborate disguise. You realize that all this striving, all this seriousness, all this effort to be something was like clouds passing across an endless sky. The sky was never troubled. That's why so many enlightened beings seem to laugh so much. They've seen through the cosmic joke that we spend lifetimes trying to become what we already are. The entire struggle was a kind of divine hide and seek, and the punchline is that there was never anywhere to hide. When you look at the world through awakened eyes, even the chaos makes sense. You see that the apparent disorder of life is the very thing that gives it harmony. It's like a piece of jazz music if you listen closely. The dissonance is what gives it depth. The pauses make the melody sing. Without contrast, there can be no art, no meaning, no experience. So, when you find yourself irritated by the ego in others, remember this: it is the same life pretending to be lost, the same consciousness playing the role of ignorance. And if you can see that, even for a moment, compassion arises without effort. You stop trying to wake people up by shaking them, and instead you wake them by loving them. Because love, real love, is the ultimate expression of awakening. It's not the sentimental affection of possession or desire. It is the recognition that there is no other. To love is to see yourself in everything and everything in yourself. That's why the mystics say God is love, not because there's a deity handing out affection, but because the very structure of existence is unity, and unity experienced from within feels like love. And then, quite naturally, you begin to live differently. You move through the world with a light touch. You act, but without anxiety about results. You speak, but without the need to convince. You work, but without the hunger for reward. And because you no longer demand life to be anything other than what it is, you discover that it unfolds with astonishing grace. At some point, you will look back on your journey and realize something extraordinary. Every mistake, every heartbreak, every confusion was the path itself. The obstacles were not in your way. They were your way. The very things that irritated your ego were the exact pressures that softened you into awareness. Life has always known what it was doing, even when you didn't. So, if you are awakening and the world seems strange, if friends misunderstand you, if people react to your calm with suspicion, if life feels at once empty and full, don't worry. You're not losing your mind. You're finding your soul. The emptiness is not absence, it's spaciousness. The silence is not loneliness, it's truth speaking softly. You are the awareness behind the play, the stillness behind the storm, the watcher of all that comes and goes. And when you see that clearly, you no longer seek a place to belong, because you realize you belong everywhere. You no longer seek approval, because you know you were never apart from what approves. The wave has remembered it is the ocean. And so you laugh again, not because you've reached the end, but because there was never a beginning. Only this endless now, rippling through eternity as you.
Have you ever looked back at your childhood and wondered why you were so different from the other children around you? Perhaps you felt things more deeply. Perhaps you saw things others didn't see. Perhaps you carried questions that none of your playmates seemed to ask. And perhaps you thought something was wrong with you, that you were broken somehow, that you didn't fit the mold everyone else seemed to slip into so easily. But what if I told you that those very things you thought made you strange were actually signs? Signs that you were already waking up to something bigger, something the world around you hadn't quite noticed yet. Signs that your consciousness was already stretching beyond the usual boundaries, like a seed cracking open beneath the soil, long before anyone sees the green shoot above ground. Let me share with you 5 signs from childhood that might prove you are already on this path. already sensing the music that most people never hear. The first sign is that you felt everything too deeply. Were you the child who cried when you saw a dead bird on the sidewalk? The one who couldn't watch certain movies because the sadness stayed with you for days? The one who felt the mood of a room the moment you walked into it, like stepping into water and knowing instantly whether it's warm or cold? Other children seemed to bounce along. They laughed, they played, they moved on. But you absorbed everything. A harsh word from a teacher didn't just sting for a moment. It lived in you. You replayed it. You felt it in your chest like a weight. When your parents argued, even if they thought you were asleep, you felt the tension like a vibration in the air. You couldn't explain it. You just knew. This wasn't weakness, though everyone might have told you to toughen up, to stop being so sensitive. This was actually your antenna, your instrument for picking up signals that others missed. The awakened soul doesn't have thick walls. It has thin membranes. And yes, this means you feel the pain more acutely, but it also means you feel the beauty more acutely. You feel the truth more acutely. Most people go through life with their receivers turned down low. They have to, otherwise the noise would overwhelm them. But you came in with the volume turned up. You couldn't help it. This is how you were tuned. And while it made childhood harder, it also meant you were learning to read life at a level most people never access. Think of it this way. A musician with perfect pitch hears every note, every slight variation. To someone without that gift, the song sounds fine either way. But the musician knows. They hear what's off. They hear what's beautiful. They can't not hear it. You were born with something like perfect pitch for emotion, for energy, for the undercurrents of human experience. So if you were that sensitive child, the one who felt too much, understand this. You weren't defective. You were awake. Or at least, you were waking up. The world tried to teach you, to shut down, to build walls, to stop feeling so much. But part of you refused. And that refusal, that insistence on staying open even when it hurt, that was the sign. The second sign is that you asked questions nobody else was asking. Do you remember sitting in church or at the dinner table or in school and suddenly thinking, but why? Why are we doing it this way? Who decided this? What if we're wrong? Maybe you asked these questions out loud and got uncomfortable looks. Maybe adults told you to be quiet, to stop being difficult, to just accept things the way they are. Or maybe you learned quickly to keep the questions to yourself, to smile and nod while inside your mind was spinning with doubts and curiosities that nobody else seemed to share. Other children wanted to know how things worked. You wanted to know why things were the way they were. Other children accepted the rules of the game. You wanted to know who made the rules and whether the rules made any sense. This wasn't rebellion for the sake of rebellion. This was genuine wondering. You looked at the world and it didn't quite add up. People said one thing and did another. They followed traditions without understanding them. They accepted suffering as normal. They chased after things that seemed hollow, and you, even as a child, sensed something was off about all of it. The awakened soul is born with a kind of cosmic skepticism. Not cynicism, skepticism. A willingness to question, to peek behind the curtain, to not take the surface story as the whole truth. Most people never develop this. They accept the script they're handed and read their lines until the curtain falls. But you couldn't. Something in you kept whispering, there's more to this. Look closer. Don't believe everything you're told. Maybe you asked about death and what happens after. Maybe you asked about God and why people fight over God. Maybe you asked about fairness and why some people have so much while others have nothing. Maybe you asked about the point of it all, the meaning, the reason we're here. These are not childish questions. These are the oldest questions, the deepest questions, the questions that sages and mystics have wrestled with for thousands of years, and you were asking them at age 7 or 8 or 10. Why? Because your soul was already looking beyond the game. It was already sensing that the ordinary explanations weren't sufficient. The third sign is that you spent a lot of time alone, and you liked it. Were you the child who wandered off to sit under a tree while the other kids played tag? The one who could spend hours in your room with your books or your drawings, or just your thoughts? The one who didn't always need friends around, who sometimes preferred the quiet company of yourself. It's not that you were antisocial. You could play with others, you could laugh and run and be part of the group. But something in you also craved solitude. You needed it the way you needed sleep. Too much time with people drained you. Too much noise, too much talking, too much surface chatter, and you started to feel lost, scattered, like you were forgetting something important. Other children seemed to fear being alone. They needed the group. They needed the validation, the distraction, the constant stimulation. But you went inward. You found something there in the silence that the noise couldn't give you. Perhaps you called it imagination. Perhaps you called it daydreaming. Perhaps you didn't call it anything at all. You just knew that when you sat quietly, when you let the world fade a bit, something else emerged. A stillness. A presence. A sense that you were more than just your name and your body and your circumstances. The awakened soul requires solitude. Not all the time, but regularly. Like a well that needs time to refill. You were already practicing this as a child, though nobody taught you. You were already learning to listen to the voice that doesn't shout, the voice that only speaks when everything else gets quiet. People might have worried about you. They might have said you were too introverted, too withdrawn, too much in your own world. But you weren't lost in your own world, you were found there. You were discovering that the most interesting thing in your life wasn't out there in the playground, or the shopping mall, or the television. It was in here, in the vast interior space of your own awareness. This is what meditation masters spend years trying to teach. The art of being alone without being lonely. The art of sitting still without getting bored. The art of finding richness in silence. You stumbled into this as a child. And while it might have made you seem odd to others, it was actually a sign of great spiritual maturity. You were already learning to be with yourself, to listen to yourself, to trust the inner quiet more than the outer noise. The fourth sign is that you saw through pretense and couldn't play along. Did you ever watch adults lie and wonder why nobody else seemed to notice? Not big dramatic lies, small ones, the polite ones, the social ones. Your mother smiling at a neighbor she just complained about. Your father pretending to like his boss at a company party. Your teacher praising a student she clearly couldn't stand. Other children might not have noticed or cared, but you noticed. You saw the mask and you saw the face beneath it. And it bothered you. It felt wrong. It felt like everyone was playing a game and pretending the game was real life. Maybe you tried to point it out once or twice. But Mom, you said you didn't like her. But Dad, you said your boss was a fool. And you got the look. The look that said, hush. We don't talk about these things. This is how the world works. But something in you resisted. Something in you couldn't fake it, couldn't play along, couldn't put on the mask quite as easily as everyone else seemed to. At parties you stood there awkward, unable to make small talk that felt empty. At family gatherings you felt like you were watching a performance. Everyone had their lines, everyone knew their role, and you were supposed to play yours. but you couldn't quite do it. Or when you did, it felt exhausting, like wearing clothes that don't fit. The awakened soul has a very low tolerance for pretense. It sees the theater, and it can't unsee it. This doesn't make you better than others. It doesn't make you more moral. It just means you're operating at a different frequency. You're picking up on the reality beneath the surface, and once you see it, you can't go back to pretending you don't. This is the emperor's new clothes. Everyone agreeing to see something that isn't there, because agreement is easier than truth. But you were the child who couldn't agree. Not because you wanted to be difficult, but because your eyes worked differently. You saw what was actually there, and what was actually there was often quite different from what people said was there. As you grew older, you probably learned to navigate this better. You learned to play the game when necessary, to smile and nod, to keep your observations to yourself. But you never forgot. You never stopped seeing. And that seeing, that inability to be fully fooled by the surface story, that was a sign of your awakening. The fifth sign is that you felt homesick for a place you'd never been. This is perhaps the strangest sign, and yet many awakened souls will recognize it immediately. Did you ever feel as a child a kind of longing, not for something specific, not for a toy or a trip or a person, but for something you couldn't name? A feeling that you were far from home, even when you were sitting in your own house. A feeling that you belonged somewhere else, somewhere you couldn't quite remember or describe. Some children feel this as a sadness. Others feel it as a restlessness. A sense that this world, this life, this ordinary existence isn't quite right. Not wrong exactly, just not complete. Like you're waiting for something. Like you're supposed to be somewhere else, doing something else, being something else. You might have looked at the stars and felt it. You might have sat by water and felt it. You might have been in a crowd and suddenly felt it wash over you. This ache, this strange nostalgia for something you've never experienced, at least not in this life. The truth is, the awakened soul remembers. Not consciously, perhaps. Not in words or images. But somewhere deep down, it remembers that it is not merely this body, this name, this story. It remembers that it came from something bigger, something infinite, something that this ordinary life only hints at. And so there is always this faint homesickness, this longing to return to the source, to remember fully, to wake up completely. Other children don't feel this because they are not yet sensing the gap between what they are and what they appear to be. They take the world at face value. They accept that this is it, this is life, and they settle into it. But you couldn't settle. Not completely. Something in you remained unsettled, remained awake, remained aware that there is more. This is not depression, though it can be mistaken for it. This is spiritual memory, the soul remembering itself. And if you felt this as a child, that strange homesickness for nowhere in particular, that longing for something you couldn't name, then you were already waking up, already sensing that life is more than meets the eye, already knowing in some wordless way that you are not just a person living a life, you are consciousness itself, briefly wearing the costume of a person. So what does it all mean? Here we are. 5 signs. Feeling too deeply. Asking impossible questions. Needing solitude. Seeing through the masks. Longing for home. If even 1 or 2 of these resonated with your childhood, chances are you were already an awakened soul, or at least a soul in the process of awakening. But what does this mean for you now? Well, it means several things. First, it means your childhood wasn't a mistake. All that strangeness, all that sensitivity, all that feeling different and out of place, it wasn't a flaw, it was a feature. You were picking up on things that most people never notice. You were seeing what most people never see. And yes, this made growing up harder. But it also made you real in a way that many people never become. Second, it means you have a responsibility, not a burden. A responsibility is huge, because the world needs people who can feel deeply, who can ask real questions, who can sit in silence, who can see through pretense, who can remember that we are more than these bodies and these stories. The world is drowning in noise and surface and distraction. And you, with your particular way of being, you are medicine. You are an antidote to the sleepwalking. Third, it means you don't have to pretend anymore. If you spent your childhood trying to be like everyone else, trying to fit in, trying to dull your sensitivity or quiet your questions or hide your need for solitude, you can stop now. You can accept that you were built differently. Not better, not worse, differently. And that difference is exactly what you're meant to bring to this world. The awakened soul isn't awakened because it's special. It's awakened because it couldn't help but wake up. It tried to sleep like everyone else. But something kept poking it, nudging it, whispering in its ear, and finally it opened its eyes and realized, oh, I've been awake this whole time. I just thought I was supposed to be asleep. If you were that child, the one who felt too much, asked too much, needed quiet too much, saw too much, longed too much, then you were already awake. Perhaps you didn't know what to call it. Perhaps you tried to ignore it, or suppress it, or make it go away. But it didn't go away, did it? Because it's not something you can get rid of. It's what you are. And now, looking back, you can see that those signs were not problems to be solved. They were invitations. Invitations to trust your own experience, to honor your own awareness, to stop pretending you're something you're not. The meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain, and so obvious, and so simple. Yet everybody rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. But the awakened soul knows this already. Even as a child it knew. It didn't need to be taught. It just knew, somewhere deep down, that the point isn't to get somewhere else or become someone else. The point is to be here, to be awake, to be present to this strange and beautiful and terrible and miraculous fact of existence. So if these signs are yours, if you recognize yourself in these patterns, then welcome. Welcome to a life of being more awake than the culture around you generally prefers. Welcome to a life of seeing what others miss and feeling what others avoid. Welcome to a life of asking questions that don't have easy answers and finding comfort in silence when everyone else is shouting. You are not broken. You never were. You were just awake in a world that's mostly asleep. And the world needs you to stay awake, not to judge those who are sleeping, not to feel superior or separate, but simply to be what you are, to be the one who feels, who questions, who sits quietly, who sees clearly, who remembers home. That's what an awakened soul does. It doesn't try to wake anyone up by force. It just lives awake. And in doing so, it gives permission to others to wake up too, simply by being itself, simply by refusing to pretend, simply by staying open when everything else is closing down. You've been doing this since you were a child. You just didn't have the words for it. Now you do. Now you can look back and see that your strange childhood wasn't a mistake. It was the beginning of something. And that something is still unfolding, still growing.
You see, the funny thing about human beings is that we are always looking for something that has never been lost. And we're so clever at it that we can spend an entire lifetime doing it, quite seriously, with great books and big temples and heavy questions like, what am I really supposed to do? We are, in a sense, professional seekers. And like any good profession, it has its tools: meditation, prayer, therapy, business plans, protein shakes. Each one promises to finally get you there. But no one ever really tells you where there is. And perhaps that's the first clue, because what if you're already there and your search is simply disguising the fact that you don't want to be? Now, this is rather awkward, isn't it? Because if that's true, then the whole structure of modern ambition collapses. The idea that you can finally fix yourself, finally earn peace, finally reach some kind of enlightened state, it all begins to look like a dog chasing its own tail, round and round. And if you're fast enough, you might even think you're getting somewhere. But the moment you stop, you see the whole game. You were the one spinning all along. And you see, this is the sort of divine joke the universe likes to play. It gives you the taste for the search, it gives you the books and the teachers and the podcasts, and it lets you run until you collapse in exhaustion. Because only when you are tired enough of looking does the real seeing begin. There's an old Zen story, about a student who went to his master and said, "Master, I am tired of seeking. What shall I do?" And the master said, "Good. Then stop seeking." And the student, frustrated, said, "But if I stop seeking, how will I find it?" And the master smiled. "Ah, you see, the seeker is the problem. That's the heart of it. You see, the universe isn't hiding from you. It has never once gone into hiding. It's been dancing in front of you all this time, in your breath, in the wind that moves through your hair, in the absurdity of trying to explain what you already are. But you were so busy looking out there that you forgot to feel here. And it's not your fault. You were raised in a culture that worships the pursuit. You were told to chase grades, careers, happiness, enlightenment, even authenticity. You were never told that the moment you try to possess these things, they vanish. Happiness isn't something you own, it's something you notice. Peace isn't a goal, it's an atmosphere that reveals itself when the noise stops. And enlightenment, well, that's the greatest punchline of all, because there's no one left to achieve it. You see, every great tradition, whether Eastern or Western, has in its own poetic way been whispering the same thing. Stop running. The thing you're looking for isn't hiding behind the next corner of the mind. It's right here, breathing with you, looking through your eyes, pretending to be the one who's searching. And if you really listen, really listen, you'll feel a strange silence begin to open beneath all your questions. It's not an answer, it's not even a thought. It's more like space, the kind of stillness that has always been there, quietly supporting the noise. Most people are afraid of that silence. They'll do anything to fill it music, scrolling, arguing, manifesting, improving. Because silence reveals something uncomfortable, that the one who's trying to be fixed was never broken in the first place. So here you are, after years of self-help, still sitting on the same chair, in the same skin, thinking that you should be different. And that thought itself keeps the wheel spinning. Because the moment you think you should be something other than what you are, you've already rejected life as it is. And life, being infinitely polite, will keep offering you new forms of dissatisfaction, just so you can continue your noble quest to fix what was never wrong. It's a rather generous universe in that sense. But it's also mischievous. It lets you build your little altars to progress and discipline, and then, just when you think you've mastered the game, it knocks them over. Not out of cruelty, but to remind you that you can't hold what is already you. The same way you cannot bite your own teeth or see your own eyes directly, you cannot find the self because you are it. The one looking is the one being looked for. The whole search collapses when you see that the seeker and the sought were never separate. And so, at the end of all your efforts, after all your striving, something rather beautiful happens. You give up, not in defeat, but in relief. You realize you've been standing in your own way this entire time. And when that realization dawns, not as an idea, but as a felt sense, the whole machinery of striving falls silent. And in that silence, there it is, the thing you've been running after through lifetimes of desire, discipline, guilt, and effort. Peace, not earned, not achieved, simply revealed. You see, The secret was never hidden, it was only ignored. But don't take my word for it. Try doing nothing, truly nothing, for just a moment. Don't try to meditate. Don't try to breathe properly. Don't even try to be present. And suddenly, there you are, the one who was never lost. Once you have seen that the seeker was never separate from what was sought, there comes this strange question: what now? Because life, you see, doesn't stop just because you've had a moment of realization. You still get hungry. You still have to pay bills. You still forget where you left your keys. And this is where most people trip again. They think awakening means rising above life. No, no, no. No, it means sinking back into it. It's like realizing the ocean you were swimming in was water all along, and suddenly you relax and float. Now, that doesn't mean you never sink again. Sometimes you still struggle, still grasp, still worry, but you know something you didn't before. You know it's all part of the same ocean. And so life becomes, in a curious way, lighter. Not easier, necessarily, but lighter. You stop dragging yourself around like a problem to be solved. You begin to laugh at the whole cosmic hide-and-seek game that consciousness seems to be playing with itself. You see, existence hides from itself in the form of you. It forgets it's infinite, and then spends years trying to remember. And when it finally does, it says, "Ah, that was quite the game." And then, just as easily, it forgets again. That's why the wisest people in history always had a sense of humor. They laughed, not because they didn't care, but because they finally saw the absurdity of caring too much. They realized that seriousness is a form of fear, the refusal to let life flow as it is. When you stop taking yourself so seriously, something beautiful happens. Compassion begins to arise naturally, because you no longer divide the world into you and them. You look at another person, even the difficult ones, and you recognize the same cosmic mischief behind their eyes, the same confusion, the same longing, the same search for something that was never gone. And you can't help but forgive them, because how can you stay angry at a dream character once you know you're dreaming? Now, this doesn't mean you suddenly become passive or lose your individuality. It means you start to live as life itself, not as an actor trying to control the plot. You begin to see that every movement, every breath, every impulse, even the ones you used to call mistakes, are all part of one continuous motion of being. It's like watching fire. No flame is separate, yet each dances in its own way. And if you watch carefully enough, you begin to see that all of existence is dancing with itself, as itself. The tree is dancing as a tree. The bird is dancing as flight. And you, my friend, are dancing as you. That's the real freedom, not to escape the dance, but to join it fully. Because you see, every attempt to control life was a misunderstanding of what control actually is. Real control is not domination, it's participation. When a musician plays perfectly, he's not controlling the instrument, he's merged with it. In the same way, when you stop trying to fix your life, life begins to play through you like music. You still make choices, yes, but they no longer come from fear. They arise naturally, like waves forming on the sea. And the sea doesn't need to plan its waves. So, how do you live once you've seen that you were never lost? You live like a person who's finally come home. You stop performing for a God you thought was watching you, and instead realize you are that very watching. You begin to enjoy simple things again, not because they bring you closer to enlightenment, but because they are enlightenment in disguise. The sunlight on the floor, the laughter of a child, the way a stranger smiles for no reason at all of it is sacred because all of it is you. Now, some people worry, if I stop striving, won't I become lazy? Won't life fall apart? No, because you never really controlled it in the first place. The planet spins quite beautifully without your supervision. Your heart beats all on its own, and your lungs keep rhythm with the wind. You were never the conductor of this orchestra. You were always part of the symphony. And when you realize that, you stop trying to outsmart the music. You simply listen. There's a subtle intelligence, you see, that moves everything, and when you stop resisting it, it moves through you effortlessly. You begin to trust again, not in belief, not in dogma, but in direct experience. You feel the universe breathing you, feeding you, thinking you, and then one day you laugh because you finally understand the punchline. There was never a you to be saved. There was only life, pretending to be a person who needed saving. And the great irony is that the moment you stop trying to be spiritual, you become naturally spiritual. The moment you stop trying to be perfect, you begin to live perfectly. Not because you followed some map to heaven, but because you realized you were standing in heaven all along. So when the mind starts whispering again, maybe I've lost it, maybe I need to get back, just smile. You can't lose what you are. The sky doesn't need to remember it's blue. All that really changes is the seeing, the recognition that life was never a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be experienced. You are not here to reach something, you are here to express something. And that expression is happening right now, as this breath, as this moment, as this incredible play of form and silence. And when the curtain finally falls, as it does for everyone, you won't be afraid, because you'll know it was only a performance, and you were both the actor and the audience, clapping for yourself all along. So when you've tried everything, every book, every technique, every dream of becoming something greater, nothing seems to work, maybe that's not failure. Maybe that's grace, because the end of seeking is the beginning of seeing. And when you finally stop trying to find the secret, it smiles at you quietly and says, the secret was never hidden.